This podcast is brought to you by the Association for Coaching, an international professional body which is advancing coaching in business and society worldwide. To join our global community and access member-only webinars, events, a wide range of digital learning offerings, coaching and leadership resources, accreditation schemes, and more, you can find us at associationforcoaching.com. Hello and welcome to another episode of Coaching in the Climate Crisis. My name is George Warren and I'm your host, and today I'm joined by a coach, facilitator, therapist, time to think faculty and speaker. And I'm very, very pleased to welcome Linda Aspey to the conversation today. Linda, hello, how are you doing?
Hello, George, and thank you for inviting me. I'm doing fine, thank you.
Brilliant. It's a real honour to have you here today. What would be a great place to start, Linda, would be hearing a bit more about the work that you do at the moment.
Sure. For the last year, my focus has been largely on two things. One is working with leaders and in facilitating conversations, often using tools like the work that reconnects, the work of Joanna Macy and all, to help them to think about climate change in a much more holistic way. Often people tend to think about it from hearing what's going on and then quick into action, let's leap into action, without actually doing any processing of how they're really feeling. And so as a result, you can get burnout quite quickly if you just leap from your head to your hands. So helping leaders to really have great conversations about how they're responding to this, what their organisations are doing, what they're doing personally, professionally, how they're building climate thought, thinking about the climate and the environment into their business strategies and their everyday life, rather than something that's bolted on. So that's one strand, is working with leaders. And the second strand then is working with coaches and as a supervisor and also as a teacher, helping coaches and counsellors and therapists to begin to grapple with some of the things that our professions face in terms of how we manage ourselves, how we prepare ourselves to do this work, and then how we do the work of climate change coaching, climate change counselling, amidst all the realities of everyday life and the news that keeps bombarding us on a daily basis.
And how did you get to a point where you can supervise or coach or even train others around the emotions of the climate crisis? What did you go through yourself in order to get to a place where you could help others?
Well, I think that's a good question you've asked, and you've nailed it, actually. I think we have to do the work on ourselves, or have the acknowledgement in ourselves, and work through it in order to be useful to others. Climate crisis is such an existential threat to us all. It's not like perhaps other forms of coaching or counselling where you don't have to suffer with what the person's suffering with to be of use. I get the sense that it's really useful to have experienced some of the feelings yourself and work through them in order to find a way forward and to find where you can be of use. So how I came about it, really, I've been a very strong advocate for the environment for years in both my lifestyle and eating habits. But until 5 years ago, I was still doing, 6 years now, still doing things like very occasional flights. So I wasn't quite joining up all the dots for me. And that was some of my personal choices. So it was really about 3 years ago when I heard the tail end of a documentary on the radio about the decline of butterflies in Holland. And I've written about this in Coaching Today magazine in a piece called Coaching with the Earth in Mind. And I don't quite know, still to this day, don't know quite why that piece of information at that particular time had the impact on me. But I really do call it my butterfly moment, because the extent of the loss of 85% of butterflies in Holland was just such a gobsmacking number. And it made me pull the car over and start to cry, just wailed. And then I couldn't understand why I was so touched by this. And I went home and I just spent the weekend researching and got deep into really quite how serious this is. And I think for a long time I'd been using the defence process that everyone uses, that it's not here yet, it's a long way away, the scientists say this, I can't make that much difference. However, saying that, I wasn't completely blind to it. I tried to live a good lifestyle, but I began to realise then it isn't all about the life I lead, it's about the systems that we are operating in much more. So that really was the start of my journey. So I leapt straight into activism, just leapt in, because I was just desperate to do something. So I joined Extinction Rebellion as soon as it formed and became a speaker and trainer with them. I learned an awful lot about climate change, learned a lot about communicating key messages, learned about what it is to take risks, to be a rebel at my age and those kind of things. And then just thought, well, what more can I do? How can I translate what I'm learning with XR and on my personal journey into how I work as a coach, as a therapist, as a supervisor, as a facilitator? So I decided to take myself off to Oxford University and joined the School of Climate Change and studied there for one of their summer schools. In fact, I think it was the summer and their autumn school, with weekly lectures from fantastic climate experts, just incredible experts. And I felt at the time that I really needed knowledge. I don't quite know what drove that need for knowledge. So then I got hungry for more knowledge. So I joined the Cambridge Institute for Sustainability Leadership and did quite a well-recognised programme there. It's an 8-week, massively intensive programme with casework and group work and essays to do every single week, about 30 hours of study a week. They said it was 10. I think they were fibbing. And I did that and learned a lot through that. And as I came out of it, I realised, and oddly, that both the activism and the academic learning, which have both been incredible experiences, and I'm both still involved deeply in those areas, is that I hadn't really processed how I was feeling. I just leapt straight to act. I leapt straight to doing. And I realised, gosh, that's what a lot of us do. And I hadn't really let the enormity really, really sink in. So then I trained to be a Work That Reconnects facilitator, taking the work of Joanna Macy and the books called Active Hope and various other books around that, and really learned how to help people to have better conversations and help me to have better conversations, actually, about how I was feeling and learning to manage the enormity of it all. How about you? How did you come to this?
So I live up in North Wales and I'm a very passionate swimmer, and it's been a great release for me and a great sense of adventure. And it's something that really scares me, whether it's deep lakes or the sea with tides and jellyfish. I find it very scary, but it's also a place where I can grow and build my confidence. And the nearest town to me is a place called Fairbourne, which is projected to be the first settlement in the UK lost to climate change. The residents of Fairbourne are due to be the first British climate refugees. And that was one of many waking up moments that, yes, we can talk about, oh, isn't it lovely how hot it is every year, and notice, oh, actually, it's starting to get really, really hot. But until then, for me, climate change had always seemed something very distant and far away. However, it is literally on my doorstep. So I owe a great debt to many coaches, the Climate Coaching Alliance, Zoe Cohen, Charlie Cox, and yourself. And what I especially valued is the fact that even you telling me your journey now, but also having heard it before, I've learnt that the skills that we coaches have are hugely valuable. And so I've been working through not only my own eco-anxiety and a sense of guilt for what I haven't done in the past related to lifestyle choices, but I've been really comforted, but also propelled to act by the fact that coaches have a unique set of skills, a privileged position, and that I feel a burden of responsibility to do what I can. And what I can do is talk about these things, ask questions about these things, host podcasts where I speak to experts in the field. So I feel a huge resonance with what you're saying about working through our own emotions and going on that journey ourselves to then help other people. And in our case as coaches, often that's by helping people have better conversations and to have a deeper awareness of what's going on for them, but what we can do, that it's not hopeless. And yeah, you mentioned Active Hope there. I'm very pleased to say that Chris Johnston is going to be a guest on this podcast series. And it's funny how many of the people I've spoken to who are involved in the climate crisis and coaching have mentioned Active Hope as a key source and a key text. So I'm delighted, and I'm sure Chris will be, that it's got another mention today.
Wonderful. And I would add to that, doing the work on ourselves is an ongoing project. It's not as if I've done the work and now that's great, I'm sorted, I'm fixed. I regularly experience massive days of climate grief, massive moments when I need to retreat from it, times when I need a few hours away from the news, or a day or two away from the news. I need a mental spa, and then I come back to it again. So doing the work on ourselves and noticing, I think it's in a way, it's like unconscious bias. We have to keep working at it and keep getting aware and keep noticing the small things that we do and we think, and our patterns of behaviour and the way we relate to the earth. That is a constant evolutionary process rather than I did the work, so I'm sorted, because I'm not.
It's a really valuable point you've raised there, Linda. And I'm thinking of the Peter Hawkins model around ecoactive. And I'm aware that I remember that that's a cyclical model. And that really resonates with me because I'd felt like I'd gone through that process around the climate crisis. And I'd got to a point where I was active. And then, as I'm sure you can relate, I started reading more and more, having more conversations, and started realizing that, as has been said elsewhere in this podcast, that the climate crisis we're in is more a symptom of a much wider system. For example, around consumption and around some of the financial models. And also, I became aware that the climate crisis is inextricably linked to conversations around how society runs, around race, around poverty, and that you can't really have a conversation about one without a much more wider systemic conversation. So that then triggered me to go back to the start of the circle around feeling a bit anxious and a bit unaware and a bit hopeless. So it really resonates with me that this is a sort of an ongoing process, and there is a very cyclical nature to it.
Yes, it's not like the grief cycle either. And whilst it is cyclical, we don't necessarily go back to the same place we started. And we don't necessarily have one feeling or one state that follows another. I can go from euphoria one moment to absolute despondency another. But I've learned to recognise that in myself a lot more when that happens. And you're right about this. I think that's one of the reasons, I mean, we might come on to this, about why there is such widespread difficulty in engaging with the topic, that it is overwhelming. It is so big because it does touch on all aspects of our life, on our society, on our relationship with the rest of nature, on our relationship with other human beings living the other side of the world, on our consumption patterns, on our identity, on our values, on our aspirations. It touches on so many parts of the life we've constructed for ourselves, particularly since the Industrial Revolution. Although there is something maybe innate about the human condition that has a self-destruct element to it, the shadow side, which we might come on to a bit more.
Well, let's go on to it now. It sounds fascinating. Maybe you could say a bit more about that.
Well, it is interesting that since the beginning of time that's been recorded, human beings have wondered how we got here, haven't they? If we look at cave paintings of space people arriving and worshipping sun gods and moon gods and animal gods and all those kind of things, and a pursuit of a search for meaning. Why are we here? How did we get here, and why are we here? And at the same time, we've often foretold our own demise. Apocalyptic stories in the Bible, apocalyptic stories in all kinds of religions, resurgence in the last few years, particularly of movies showing Armageddon and what's it going to be like when the Earth is... Some of the games my nephews play on video is just press destruct planet Earth. So there's something in us that has almost predicted our own demise for a very long time. And it's dangling on that edge, isn't it? Dangling on that edge of uncertainty that perhaps just keeps us alive. But I do I've been having some fascinating conversations with some psychoanalysts and therapists as well of recent weeks. And there does seem to be a kind of feeling amongst some that what we have always been searching for is meaning. And we've been filling this gap that we've got with consuming. We just keep consuming more and more. And if we think about where modern day consumption patterns started, the much more modern day, is we look at post-war, we look at Freud's nephew, I think it was Edward Bernays or Adam, I've forgotten his name now, I can look that up, who was commissioned to help us suspend more, to help us recover from the war. And so he tapped into what his uncle had taught him about human frailty and our need to be better than and have more than, and our need to compete. So thus creating even more of a culture of, if you don't have this, you're lacking in some way. And so with that came much more choice. Some choices clearly weren't good for us. And so often it's interesting how humans, whether at a societal level, that we've got an unconscious awareness that we're on a destructive path, or at a personal level, how many people of the world today still smoke, knowing that it's harmful. How many people of the world today still drink alcohol, including me, knowing that in excess it's harmful? How many people say, lots of people who say they won't take the COVID vaccine because they don't know what's in it, and yet they've been eating McDonald's for years. So they don't actually have a breakdown of ingredients. So there's something in us that plays with that idea of frailty, of annihilation. I don't quite know what it is, but it might be a lack of meaning. And as I said, I think we've been filling that gap with stuff.
And thank you so much for sharing that. And the question that comes up, hearing you speak, that is, in your opinion, how might coaches or leaders that coach, how might we start bring these into conversations that we're having with not only with clients, but also colleagues or people we work with or friends or family? Because it gets quite deep quite quickly, and we need to be very careful, I believe, not to be coming across as judging or putting people into a sense of defensiveness or feeling threatened. So from your experience working with, in therapy, and also as a coach and facilitator and supervisor, what sort of advice or tips would you give for us to have these better conversations?
Well, I think you've nailed it with talking about judging. Nobody wants to be judged. We have an innate fear of being judged. So I think that anything that reminds us of our bad behaviour or potentially bad behaviour is going to cause alienation. We're defensive enough about climate change on a universal scale. The media are defensive about it. Politicians are defensive about it because what it's doing is threatening us. It's threatening our way of life. It's threatening our idealised version of ourselves, of the world we thought we'd have, of the parent we are, of the whoever we are. So anything that would threaten the life that we are currently living and causes us to feel dissonance, I'm doing that, but I believe that, is going to provoke an anxious response if we threaten people. So going in without judgment, and that's really hard sometimes. We're human and we judge all the time. We make decisions based on what we judge. We discriminate, and I don't mean to say that's always about unfairness. We have a capacity to discriminate between one piece of information and another, or one piece of fact and another, and sometimes one piece of assumption and another. So I think trying to suspend that is an acquired thing. We've got to learn how to do that because we know it doesn't work if we do judge people. And much as I just rage when I see car engines running. I just rage. Internally, I'm just raging. Why can't you switch your car engine off in a busy market square when all you're doing is waiting for someone to come out of a shop and you don't need the heater or the aircon on? Why is it not in your mind? Well, of course it's not. And I've had to learn to switch my rage button off. And so I might knock on the window and I say, "Excuse me, I really hope you don't mind me asking, but there's kids walking around here and I notice you probably left your car engine on by mistake. Would you mind switching it off for me?" And they often go, "Oh, sorry, didn't even notice, love." So I think being tentative. It's interesting, actually, the question you've asked, George, in a slightly different vein, if I may take it somewhere differently, about how do we have those conversations as coaches. Whenever I present, I've been presenting this now for 3 years at coaching conferences, on webinars, in masterclasses and groups, in tutorials, things like that. Whenever with coaches, I raise the subject of climate change, or I just make a presentation. Here's what's happening. Here's some ideas. The very first question is, so how do we talk about it with clients? Because we're not supposed to raise the agenda. It's supposed to be the client's agenda. And whilst it's a perfectly valid question because we're in a professional context talking about it, I do find it interesting that even in the very early days of me talking about climate change to coaches who had no idea of how serious the world state is, literally no idea, and still carrying on completely with business as usual, that the very first question they ask is about how do we talk about it in coaching and not in it when it's not our agenda. Their question wasn't, my goodness me, how's this going to affect my life? How's this going to affect my grandchildren? How is this affecting the people that live there? What's happening to the creatures? What kind of decline are we seeing? What can we do about it collectively? How does society need to change? None of those questions. And I sense that there's a form of intellectualization going on as a defense process, which is put my professional hat on, ask a professional question, then I really don't have to deal with the enormity of what I've just heard about, because it is enormous. So it is a valid question. And you and I have talked about this before, about how do coaches raise it. But I also say to people, I've started to say to people, I've noticed that's the first question you're asking. Is that really how you feel right now? What else is going on for you about how you're feeling? So to go back, though, to your question about how do we raise this, I think we can be invitational. I think if we sit down with someone and stare them in the eye and grab them by the shoulder and say, we need to talk about climate change, that's going to provoke a resistant defensive response. And it will likely provoke all sorts of defenses where people say, well, there's nothing I can do about it, or it's hopeless, or I'm too small to make a difference, or it's too late, or as we call it, whataboutism. What about China? Like you talk about China. Why don't you talk about the US? These are all processes just designed to keep the conversation away. So we just need to say, I've noticed this is happening. Is this something that concerns you too? Or if it's a coaching client, when I'm doing a chemistry session with a coaching client and they've asked me to talk with them, for example, it's increasingly less that I'm being asked to work on the things I used to work on, because my profile is clearer these days that I work with climate change and environment. But before that, people would contact me to talk about their leadership or the new promotion or a new team they were managing or a new organisation they were building. And so I would say to them, when we were finding out about each other, I'd say things like, you've probably noticed there's a lot of emphasis right now on sustainability and leadership, and we're seeing climate change happening all around us in the world and in around supply chains. Is that something that you would like us to think about in our coaching work together as well? And often they say, well, yeah, absolutely. It's valid. Yeah, it's not something we talk about. And actually, it's not something I've wanted to talk about. And I said, well, that's great. I mean, do you want to start now? How are you feeling about what's going on? What are you noticing? So I've just opened it up with an invitation. If they say, only one or two have said, no, actually, no, I really want to talk about how I'm managing my time, or this doesn't very often happen, what I'm doing around this new team. That's a secondary issue. Actually, it did happen with the team I was working with. And I said to the team leader, would you like this to be something that we talk about with the team? And he said, no, I mean, they're just not capable of that at the moment. They're focusing on the job in hand, which was to do with getting through COVID. And that's just not something I want to dump on them now. So we agreed not to. What are your thoughts? What are you finding?
So I heard you speak about marketing as well. So for example, talking about these things on LinkedIn. And I think as well, what I've seen in the past, certainly the past year, is that there's an element of demystifying happening, that more and more coaches are talking about it, labeling themselves as, well, climate change coaches, climate conscious coaches, and helping the industry normalize the fact that this is something that is worthy of talking about and having a whole coaching engagement around. And you mentioned as well bringing it into chemistry sessions and contracting as something I do as well. And I love that phrase you said, make it invitational as well. So invite people to decide whether they want to talk about it or not as well. And it reminded me of something that you said at Climate Coaching Alliance meeting that we both attended. It really resonated with me. It was this idea that I think, especially to either new coaches or less experienced coaches, there's this idea, this mindset that we shouldn't offer any direction or any agenda, and that it should be sacredly the coach's agenda. Peter Hawkins, I remember he said, non-directive coaching is a myth. That really stays with me around climate change coaching. But what I especially took from what you said, Linda, is the fact that many, many, many businesses have these ESGs at the moment. They have goals they need to work with. Sustainability, from a business sense, is part of the agenda. So there's this huge market out there for businesses, for leaders, for teams that actually really would like to have conversation, would like help and support and challenge around the climate crisis. And that, for me, it's the greatest tragedy on the planet if you've got businesses and leaders and teams that want to help, and you've got coaches that feel that it's the right thing to do and want to help, but it's not happening because of this myth that oh, I don't want to rock the boat, or I don't want to put my agenda in there, or who am I to be having these conversations, or do I need to have studied at Oxford or Cambridge in order to have a conversation about this? Do I need to be an activist in order to? So I love the fact that your comment said, basically, most businesses need this sort of help. And that really inspired me to be a lot more confident and proactive with my communication around this.
Yeah, well, that's lovely to hear.
So thank you.
Thank you. That's lovely to hear. I think I'd also just like to be clear on one element, though. For me personally, as you mentioned at the start, I'm a Time to Think coach. I'm a faculty member. So I teach the Time to Think thinking environment process. I'm really clear when I'm offering someone a thinking session, that's what I'm offering them. And it is not directive. It is the most undirected form of work we can ever do. And it truly is about the client thinking for themselves, as themselves, with my generative attention being the catalyst for their thinking, to ignite their thinking rather than to respond to it. So I wouldn't suddenly bring a subject up that's not within the thinking session that we've agreed to do. So if somebody contacted me and said, I've heard about Time to Think and I'd like a thinking session, that's what we'll do. And I'll ask, what would you like to think about and what are your thoughts? And what more do you think or feel or want to say, as often as they needed that question. And so the client may never come into it. However, if I'm having a chemistry conversation with someone, I will always, which I usually do, I will always say to them in that chemistry conversation, is this something that's important to you? And increasingly, you mentioned marketing as well there. I found, for me, it was a journey of becoming a lot clearer in how I presented myself publicly and sort of came out in a way, because when I first joined Extinction Rebellion, there were just a few of us as coaches who were ex-XR, and it was, blind, they're XR activists. They must be all a bit loony, and they're dangerous folk. I remember I went to a coaching conference and they invited me as an XR speaker to come and speak. It was a really brave thing of that conference to do, to invite me to come and speak as an Extinction Rebellion activist and a coach. Many coaches like me, we keep our personal lives fairly private, particularly those who are from a counselling background, even more so perhaps. Their private lives are very private indeed, and lots of counsellors won't appear on social media, don't have Facebook accounts and stuff. So for me, part of that was saying, well, actually, this is what I believe in passionately. These are my values. So this is what I'm going to say about myself in public, so that if somebody finds me, they'll know what they're getting. So in a way, when people contact me, if they found me on social media, for that I mostly include LinkedIn, they contact me because they've seen my LinkedIn profile and I've clearly stated that I work with these issues. So my first step was saying I'm a climate activist, I was an Extinction Rebellion speaker, and that felt terribly brave and daring. And then I thought, oh, get over yourself, Linda. And one of my clients in an email conversation said, oh, I noticed you've changed your profile on LinkedIn, you're an Extinction Rebellion activist. You're really very unlikely to be an activist. And I wrote back, I know him very well. I wrote back, I said, actually, I know that's what it might appear like. I'm white, middle-aged, 50-something woman that's never broken the law knowingly. Well, apart from the odd speeding ticket, or I stole something from Superdrug when I was 14, but my mum made me take it back. So a law-abiding person to suddenly become an Extinction Rebellion activist. I said, actually, I'm a highly likely person to do that because I've got the wherewithal, I've been able to educate myself, and I've got a level of confidence that's been given to me by my privilege. I know that if I were to be arrested, and I would stress that not all XR people get arrested and don't intend to, and that's not what XR is all about. It's just one aspect of the movement. But if I did get arrested, my experience would be massively different to somebody of colour and somebody of a different social class without the same poshish voice that I've got. So I'm a highly likely activist, actually, really highly likely. And they went, God, I'd never thought of it that way. So, yeah. So, yes, I think being clear, I think the contract with our clients starts before they meet us. And that either starts because they've seen something about us or they've heard something about us, whether it's through a recommendation. So let's say someone recommends a coach to you. You already anticipate, let's say they've worked with this coach and this coach does X, Y, Z and they do a particular thing brilliantly. The person that then contacts you to commission you to work with them have already got this in their mind. It's the beginning of a mythical presence, really. This is this person I've contacted and this is maybe what they can do for me. So there's already been a bit of an implicit contract started. So my aim in coming out on social media is to make my implicit things really explicit now. So that and I've had people contacting me, I mean, I can't tell you the number of coaches that, well, you must get them too, that send you a connection message to say they can help you build up a 6-figure practice in coaching. Well, so many assumptions there. A, that I don't already have one, and B, that that's what I want. And that's why I'm in coaching. So I make that really clear now. And I write back to them, I say, that's not where I am actually. This is my concern. Are you concerned about climate change? And have you heard of the Climate Coaching Alliance? And would you be interested in joining?
Lovely to hear.
What about you? Are you getting people contacting you to talk about this?
Yeah, so I resonate a lot with what you said there, and I'm in the process of changing my website and the language I use to speak more authentically about the work that I do and the work that I want to do and the purpose. And yeah, it's been, I guess the question I was holding, which is relevant to your question, was I'd love to hear your thoughts on who are the clients of climate change coaching.
There's not that many out there yet, knowingly. I don't often get contacted, said, Linda, I'd heard you're a climate change coach. I'd like to work with you on my climate change anxiety. I do get the occasional one, but they're not, by and large, the regular ones. They are people who are contacting me to say, I want to get the team together to talk about how we come together following COVID, what needs to change for us, how we build back better, how we build back greener. Can you come and help us have some conversations? The therapists that I talk to, I do much more coaching than therapy. Therapy is really not something that I really offer as a mainstream thing. It's more of therapeutic coaching. But it's surprising how often it comes up in the room, but it's not necessarily that visible. So people will talk about general anxiety, general malaise, discontentment with the world, not sure where they're going, where the direction is, not feeling very safe, having lots of different choices, to have children, not have children, to expand into this country or not, to invest in this supply chain when they've had difficulties getting supplies through. So often the climate crisis is the background to this. Or they're talking about COVID and responses to COVID. So they're all interwoven, as you said right at the start. Or they might talk about how they want to do more work on social justice or inequality and diversity. And those things are all wrapped up in climate change. So climate change isn't that often coming along as the presenting issue to me, okay, just occasionally. But it is coming in. And all I'm doing is offering people permission, giving people permission to talk about it if they haven't raised it, and making it clear that that's where my interests lie. And one thing I would just say about training ourselves and getting ourselves informed, I do think we need to be informed about climate change and ecological decline as much as we would need to be informed about how businesses work, about how hierarchies in organisations work, how relationships and power dynamics play out, how processes and systems work and help or hinder us. I don't think we need to be a scientific expert. I did that through defence processes. I went and learnt and just devoured information. And I am a bit of a knowledge, what's the word for it? I'm a bit of a magpie, and I do like a good bit of intellect, to keep me stimulated. So I was doing it for interest, but a lot of it was around, I think, looking back now, is how can I possibly help people in this world if I don't know the first thing about it. So that's what took me on that journey. So I do think there's lots of things coaches can learn. There's some fantastic short programs. I also did a program with the Ellen MacArthur Foundation on the circular economy, which is so inspiring, so uplifting, about how we can really change our cities and our towns and our businesses and our lives. So there's things there that aren't just learning for science sake. They're learning to give us tools and vehicles to help people to make that transition from the life they're now living or the business they're now running into something new and more hopeful. Business as usual is killing us all. We can't continue this way. So what are the alternatives, and how can coaches help people to make that transition without shoving them out, onto the parapet?
So it sounds like from what you're saying that while it's relatively uncommon for prospective clients to reach out to you specifically because they want to cover the subject of the climate crisis or their relationship with the climate crisis, it sounds instead more like these things are emerging either during the contracting or they're actually surfacing during the course of a coaching relationship.
Individual coaching clients are much more likely to come with other presenting issues. I get people who've heard or seen my profile and just contact me out of the blue. I don't know them. And they say, I'm moving jobs, or I'm taking on a new team, or I'm building a new business. Can we come and talk to you? With entrepreneurs, actually, I'm getting a few entrepreneurs who are starting up green businesses who say, I want to come and talk to you, but their focus is on the business, not how they're feeling. They don't necessarily want to process their feelings. And with organisations and teams, I am getting contacted to talk about climate change, but it's more from a facilitative point of view. We're going to be working on our goals. We're going to be working on our plan. We want to become net zero. Will you come and facilitate some conversations? So whilst that is the presenting issue, their presenting issue is not how they're feeling about climate change and how they're processing it. It's actually what they're doing about it, which is fine, absolutely fine. And these days, what I'm offering a lot more, which is where the work that Reconnects dovetails so brilliantly, is I can work with leaders. Just last week, I did a session where a group of leaders had some very practical input in the morning from a business that had become net zero, aiming towards net zero and becoming a B Corporation. And because I understand some of that stuff now after the education I've had, I could then go in and invite them to do some personal work and said, you've heard what you've got to do or what you could do, what some of your options are to get your business from here to there and what needs to change. How are you going to sustain yourself as a leader through this journey? Because it's an ongoing journey. There is no end of lockdown. There is no hiding from climate change. You can't isolate or immunise yourself. How are you going to stay as resilient as you need to be, given everything that's going on? And that's where I can take them through the work that Reconnects, which is all about really connecting, really connecting with the beauty of the earth, with the love that we inherently have of nature, with the gratitude that we can feel for the air we breathe and the life and the legacy we want to leave and the vision we have for the future. When we've done that, they can then join the two bits together and go away a lot more whole than if they'd just done an action planning session on how do we get to net zero.
Wonderful.
Are you getting requests like that yourself?
I do. I would say that for me, the main way in which the climate crisis, so I coach some activists, I coach also some coaches that want to journey more. I do a lot of work with new coaches in career transition as well. So it's tending to come into the chemistry conversations and also, as you say, emerging during the course of a coaching relationship. I wanted to ask, because obviously we might have new coaches there or those that are transitioning into a coaching career, and it's such a booming industry. I'm aware of how many new and potentially new coaches there are. And within that, I'm aware, and I know from my conversations with things like the Climate Coaching Alliance, how many thousands of coaches there are that want to do more, that want to take that leap into, as you said, labeling themselves as a climate conscious coach, climate change coach. So what advice would you like to share to those coaches on the precipice about how to market themselves, how to monetize, how to make a living as a climate change coach or facilitator?
Well, I think I'd go one step back to those that are considering entering a coaching career, is find a training course that's talking about climate change. I think coach training, coach education providers should be talking about this. How can we not? How can we not prepare coaches to work with people who are going through the most seismic changes ever encountered in the history of the human race, the history of the world as we currently know it as a human species? How can you not prepare people? How can you not invite them to think about what their role could be in this? And that can be hugely inspiring, but they also need skills. We need skills to manage all sorts of different feelings. We need skills to recognise defence processes. We need skills to open up conversations that we didn't think we were going to have or they didn't think we were going to have. And we may well need skills in trauma management. Imagine if you're an executive coach in Germany or Belgium right now and your client's business and home has just been swept away, or in Wales where you coach farming communities. Imagine what those people are going through. How many coaches are equipped to deal with those kind of things? How many coaches have done the work on themselves in order to do good work with others? So that's where I would say it needs to start much more with coach training providers and to embrace this as a core module, not an add-on, a core part of coaching training. And I've been banging on about this for a while. I think a few are beginning to sort of take this in. And the Climate Coaching Alliance has invited many to do that. When the manifestos, if that's what they were, this kind of clarion call that was issued is coach educators should be doing this. So if that's not been done for you and you're a coach looking at that, I'd say to find out about climate change and learn a bit. There's some great online resources, which I'll happily share with you after the podcast so you could share on an email. But some really wonderful programs out there. They're often a mix of spiritual development, personal development, professional development. But I think do the spiritual and personal work first as a sort of foundation for further work, and also learn a little bit more about what's going on. Learn about the connectedness of it all. Can't learn about climate change without learning about global inequality. You just can't. You've got to think much more, and that in turn will causes people to question their own life choices, purchasing choices, how they spend their time, how they travel, what they consume. So I think doing that background work, but not letting yourself get overwhelmed by it, because if you're just seeing what's been called doom porn, it can be addictive. You can more bad news, or look at this headline. We can only take in so much. So be kind to yourself, be compassionate, use compassionate practices. Self-care has become a dirty word in some places, but self-care is really important to look after yourself so that you can look after others. So take your time, do your research, find a tribe. This is not a time to be alone. This is not a time to be alone with your thoughts and your fears and your anxieties. Find a tribe that you can share your biggest fears with and your biggest hopes. I've got marvellous tribes. I've got a few of them. I'm in a kind of mastermind group of coaches. We're all environmentally, ecologically minded. We're all fully aware of the scale and extent of the crisis that we're in. And we can all talk really freely and openly in a way I can't with so many other people. Join as an activist if that's useful for you. Lots of roles within Extinction Rebellion and other organisations, Fridays for Future, Parents for Future, Greenpeace. So many. There's millions of environmental organisations. So I'd say get connected and into a wide community and a tribe, and then you feel more comfortable generally in talking about it in your work. To go from zero to suddenly hero in the coaching room, you've rescued me from climate change, is going to be really hard. So I think doing all the work on yourself as a system actually is really useful. And then thinking about how do you do this? Now, for many, the idea of making money out of such a crisis really sticks in the throat. How can I be a coach and make money from this, or even traumas or potential traumas? How can I do that ethically? Well, many of our systems in life depend on people helping us when we're vulnerable. Whether you're a counsellor or whether you're a hospital worker, a doctor and nurse, a healthcare assistant, someone working cleaning in a hospital. You're all there because somebody vulnerable needs your help. So why would this be any different? I think the difference is we can't exploit people. So I think charging a fair rate for work that is good work that is making a difference is a very viable thing to do when people in states of vulnerability need us. And we will have had to have paid for our training and our education and our supervision and our own personal work in order to be able to do that. So I think it's perfectly valid to build the business in that way, provided making money is not the first goal. If you get a coach writing to you on LinkedIn, connect with me and I'll build you a 6-figure income in climate coaching, I think I'd pass on that one.
Yeah, thank you for sharing your insights there. There's so much wisdom in what you've shared. And you mentioned supervision a couple of times, and I'd really love to hear your thoughts on what do you think the role of supervision is or can be or should be in climate change coaching, climate change supervision?
I think, again, it often depends on what's brought. I'm a time to think supervisor primarily, so I offer thinking time, and they run like thinking sessions. And I say, in relation to your client work, what would you like to think about? What are your thoughts? And we agree what we're going to talk about. Because people now know that I'm very involved and have done a deep dive into this, they are now saying, I'd like to talk to you about how I work with this client, or this client said this and I wished I'd said that. Someone gave an example the other day. I'll give a personal example that's probably better. Personal example, I was coaching somebody a couple of years ago and they were talking about having a big house clearance. They just wanted to get all the stuff they didn't like anymore. And they're very wealthy. They want to get all the stuff they didn't like and just put it into a few skips and send it off. And I'm just dying inside. Just think, no, you can't do that. What about recycling? What about giving it away? What about homeless people who'd love that? What about selling it? Giving, if you don't need the money, give the funds away. What about doing more than just landfill? And I had to hold on to myself and catch myself in the session. And I did say, well, I did intervene. I said, I wonder if you'd had any thoughts about other ways of getting rid of that. And they said, I haven't got time for that. And they just moved on. And I had to move on with them. I struggled with that, and I took that to my supervisor, and we decided that at that time that was probably the only thing I could have done, given that I had not prepared that person, that this is one of the things that I'm interested in, and if it comes up, this is likely that we can talk about it. I hadn't issued the invitation. So I think it's all about preparing the ground before we meet. So I hope that's answering your question. Of supervision. So yes, same thing. For supervision, preparing the ground before we meet. If you work with me, I live in a world where nature is important to me. I live in a world where various practices have been useful to me. So if they will be useful for you too, that's great. So sometimes people come in their thinking sessions, they say, they ask me, what do I find useful? And I'll say, well, I find getting out every day, at least for half an hour, more if I can, is really essential to my well-being, and it helps me think about my coaching differently and stuff. So, yeah, I think we can supervise. I think it goes, for me, it always goes back to the contract. What have we agreed to do? What have we agreed to do? What do we think we're both turning up for? And if I come away from that contract, why am I doing it on that occasion and not on others? And how can I make sure that my contracting is good enough to encompass many, many different scenarios where it doesn't feel like it's suddenly a bolt from the blue. Oh my God, no, she's brought up climate change. Where was that from? That's what I don't want. I don't want massive surprises in my coaching or my supervision.
Thank you for sharing that. So Linda, as we draw towards the end of our conversation today, what would be the best way for listeners to follow your work or connect with you, or to say hello and hear more about the work you're doing?
Great. Well, they can contact me on LinkedIn. It's Linda Aspey. They can contact me on Twitter. It's Linda Aspey. My website is aspey.com or lindaaspey.com. Sounds a bit of a theme going on here. I think I used to be called Coaching for Leaders, but I realised nobody knew who Coaching for Leaders were. So I reverted to my name. So they can contact me. I'm starting a regular podcast series for the Association for Coaching. Webinar, not podcast, a webinar called AC Climate Conversations. The first of those is next week. I don't just get the date. I think it's the 26th. So the AC Climate Conversations, that's nearly every other month. We've got them scheduled in up until next September next year, in which I will be, the first week I'm introducing Active Hope and the work that reconnects. And then in subsequent sessions, I'll be inviting people who are working in this field to come and share some of their stuff with us. So that's going to be something for AC members. I also regularly do things for Climate Coaching Alliance. I've got a model called With the Earth in Mind, which I've been developing for a couple of years now, and it's actually now being tested. And it's simply it's a holistic systemic framework just for people to offer to clients as a visual and say, where are you drawn to here and where are your thoughts going? And that's really around looking through different lenses of ourself or others or the whole world, and looking at things through our head, our heart, our hands, and looking at various elements of our lives. And it's simply just it's not a directive tool. It's simply, here's a conversation opener. And I regularly do things like free webinars and climate conversations and those kind of things. And if somebody wants coaching or supervision, just to contact me and we can talk about that. If they want something in their organisation, either a keynote. I'm doing quite a lot of keynotes that's increasingly being asked for by some of the clients that used to only use me for time to think. I'm now doing the two separately. I won't do them together because they're separate things. So keynotes I'm always happy to do. How about you? How are you getting your work out there? Through this podcast, other things?
Yes. So as I said, I'm sort of in that process of updating my website to convey what's important to me in why I coach, how I coach, and who I coach. And yeah, traditionally, like many coaches, word of mouth and recommendations are very valuable for me. LinkedIn as well, increasingly so. And yeah, I've been really quite fortunate to work with, as I said, not only coaches and facilitators who are passionate about this, but also to coach activists as well. And I find that hugely rewarding. And part of my business decision was to touch on what you said earlier, to devote a number of hours to pro bono coaching to those that couldn't traditionally afford the benefits of coaching. And I've decided to, inspired by my supervisor, I've decided to narrow that down to pro bono coaching around those that work within or want to do more around the climate crisis. So that's been a really fun and rewarding and purposeful and really exciting area to take my coaching as well. Yeah, long may it continue.
Yeah, that sounds wonderful. Yeah. And I would also just add, any entrepreneur that's setting up a company with specifically for the common good, that is got climate change at the heart of it, I'll happily work with them for free to give them some help to get started. And I've put that on my LinkedIn profile too. So I agree, we can make ourselves available in all sorts of different ways. So well done. That sounds great, George.
Thank you, Linda. And thank you so much for sharing everything that you have today. There's, as I said, so much wisdom and experience and so many great ideas in what you're saying. What would you like to say to our listeners by way of closing today?
I would like to say, find out, get educated, but don't get too consumed. Get yourself informed. Find a tribe, get some good support. Go talk to activists. People think that activists are a bit balmy and they're the criminals. If you don't know an Extinction Rebellion or other activist, offer yourself as a coach to Extinction Rebellion or other, and find out what makes them tick. You'll be giving something amazing back, and you'll be getting a chance to practice your climate coaching skills as well. And get into nature. Look at your lifestyle. Look at your choices. Plenty of advice out there on how to talk yourself. Take your business through a cycle. You've got a business, how environmentally friendly is everything you do. You can't do it all overnight, but start with some steps that you can take and start opening up conversations. There's a fantastic new project by some students at Oxford University from the School of Geography and Environment, and it's called 26,000 Conversations. And they're asking people to report on climate conversations they're having, because it's in line with COP26. So they thought, and they want to do is get 26,000 different conversations happening, whether it's on the bus, whether it's at home, or whether it's at work. So I'll share that link with you afterwards. So get yourself involved in this and don't be alone at times like this.
Thanks, Linda. Well, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. It's gone to so many different places and I've enjoyed every second of it. So yeah, thank you so much, Linda.
Thank you so much for inviting me and your fantastic questions, and lovely to find out a bit more about you too.
Thank you. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us today. I've been George Warren, and it's been an absolute pleasure to have you for today's episode in our series, Coaching in the Climate Crisis. So looking forward to having you join us next time. This podcast was brought to you by the Association for Coaching. Discover more business and coaching resources, thought leadership, and online learning at associationforcoaching.com.